with summer in full swing, we still find ourselves in quite a precarious situation. Recently, we've been feeling some restrictions lifted. Parks are open to social distancing, haircuts are no longer taboo, families are widening their bubbles. We know that we are not yet out of the woods quite yet, though perhaps we are beginning to take those first steps back into a more familiar reality. With this return to normalcy, we are also experiencing the pangs of an all too familiar rise of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism rearing their heads. Just in the last few days, we have heard the hateful rhetoric of NFL player Deshaun Jackson, celebrity Nick Cannon, and Travis Patron, the leader of the Canadian Nationalist Party. Even if these individuals only represent minority voices, they have national platforms and a great deal of support as athletes, actors, and political candidates, less so as political candidates. While we know that the CNP and its leader are nothing more than fringe movements, we will not be silent when Jews are targeted by genocidal rhetoric. Unfortunately, anti-Semitism can be felt even closer to home. You are now likely familiar with Toronto restaurant Foodbenders, as it has become the focal point of the Jewish community when it came to light that the owner has used hateful and inflammatory language to target Jewish individuals online, as well as refusing service to Jewish customers who displayed any support of Israel. What started as a one-woman crusade has grown into a larger issue, culminating with Uber Eats and Ritual, other food delivery services and stores in her supply chain, and social media sites removing her from their platforms. The resulting social media threads, both in support and in opposition to Foodbenders, are filled with hateful language. She has said unforgivable and disdainful things to and about the Jewish people. And in turn, her store was vandalized and business model destroyed. To be fully candid, I still don't know how I feel about the entirety of the Foodbenders situation. But we can look at Foodbenders as a case study for anti-Semitism masked behind the claim of anti-Zionism. Though a simple case study does not really capture the true issue here. According to a recent B'nai B'rith audit, there has been a 27% rise in violent crimes against Jews in 2019 across the country. Our province of Ontario saw the greatest rise with over 62.8%. The escalation of anti-Semitic incidents is a raging wildfire that seemingly cannot be contained. At a pro-Palestinian march in Mississauga on July 4th, a group of young people were recorded on video screaming, "Martyrs by the millions march to Jerusalem. Palestine is our country, and the Jews are our dogs." These words, along with many others, were used to describe our brothers and sisters in Israel, to describe those of us who believe in the state of Israel, and those of us who have our own internal struggles with the Israeli government. We should be quite clear. I do not believe that the state of Israel is a perfect society. I believe that Israel, like any other country in the world, has a great deal of space for improvement. And as a Jew and as a seeker of justice, I am a Zionist who believes there is a need to increase the rights of our Palestinian cousins and fellow human beings. Though none of this changes the fact that I am enraged by the blatant anti-Semitic hate speech pouring out from the streets of our neighboring cities. The land of Israel has hotly been debated for thousands of years. Not only recently, as we've turned our attention towards this threat of annexation of the West Bank, but even in this week's Parsha, we read about a war that is waged against the Midianites for their role in plotting the moral destruction of Israel. The Torah then gives a detailed account of the war spoils and how they were allocated amongst the people, the warriors, the Levites, the high priests. the separation of land, their general borders, and autonomous leaders are laid out in this week's Parsha. And in this case, God speaks directly to Moses and gives him directions of how and who should receive the land. Today, we don't have the privilege of speaking directly to God and asking who should have this land and how much land should they have. We are only human. And in this humanness, we lack the divine insight that was once given to Moses. What we do have is our ethics, our understanding, our tradition, and our willingness to have meaningful discourse about the issues that come up when talking about Israel and the Jewish people. While the pro-Israel response against food vendors may have hoped to bring more attention to injustice and anti-Semitism, they also created another point of tension between the communities. How can we have a peaceful discourse, you might ask, when one group is shouting that we are dogs in the street and one group is intentionally writing anti-Muslim sentiments in chalk? How can we create space in our land of Canada for both of these people to be heard, but most importantly, felt to be safe? As COVID continues to change and shape the world we live in, we are also seeing this rise in conspiracy theories that point fingers at us, the Jews. How is it possible that in the midst of the world's most serious health and financial crisis in recent memory, with international borders closed, the majority of my family living in high-risk states and a baby on the way, what keeps me up at night is the senseless hatred of the Jewish people? I cannot go into a grocery store without covering my face with a mask. Yet I have to pause and consider if I'm comfortable covering my head with a kippah. How appalling that this is still happening today. The alarming rise of anti-Semitism is not something that we can choose to ignore. The situation is dark, but it is not altogether without hope. We do not stand alone. For every actor and athlete and politician that has spread offensive anti-Jewish rhetoric, there are others who stand up and set the record straight. Last week, Premier Doug Ford shared his support of the Jewish community in response to the food vendor situation, saying that language and actions like this are disgusting and will not be tolerated here in Ontario. Our government stands with the Jewish community in condemning this kind of behavior here at home and across the globe. And we also have six-time NBA MVP Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in our corner. This week, the Hall of Famer wrote an article in the Hollywood Reporter entitled, "Where is the Outrage Over Anti-Semitism in Sports in Hollywood?" in which he called out Nick Cannon and Deshaun Jackson, saying that the lesson never changes. So why is it so hard for some people to learn? No one is free until everyone is free. As Martin Luther King Jr. explained, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality. So Abdul-Jabbar continues, let's act like it. If we're going to be outraged by injustice, let's be outraged by injustice against anyone. Perhaps most frustrating is that this is not new. This is a history we know all too well. It is a chapter in the story of the world that we had hoped had come to an end. A chapter that is still now being furiously written both in the shadows and right in the broad daylight of our society. Whether from the left or from the right, from the mainstream media or from the dark recesses of the web, anti-Semitism is flourishing. Hatred and division can be found everywhere. So let us be unquestionably clear. This is not about politics. This is not about religious differences or socioeconomic status. This is about hate and fear. A fear of the world changing and hatred of the other. And we know that hatred is not inherited. It is learned. And so it can be unlearned. Shortly after Nick Cannon's anti-Semitic outburst, he apologized for his miseducation. And just yesterday, the owner of Food Vendors wrote a public statement of activism and anti-Semitism. Now, whether or not that apology is up to you. I won't tell you, won't weigh in on that decision. But it is important to note that public expressions of mistakes is at least a step in the right direction. Deshaun Jackson took his education even further, meeting with a Holocaust survivor over Zoom and even committing to travel to Poland to visit Auschwitz. These individuals should not be our role models, but we can learn from them that when we make errors, even if those mistakes are rooted in prejudice or hatred, we can commit to learning and unlearning about the world around us. We must commit to stand against hate. We must make it known that we will not be intimidated into the corners of society. We stand up proudly as Jewish people to be a part of this world, not apart from it, not separate. To fill spaces with our Jewish voice, and to welcome all in, and to widen these narrow spaces. May this commitment to standing up and calling out all forms of hatred spread knowledge and widen our community with love until there is no more space for hate. May we find words to offer to each other when we draw near to one another. And may we hold each other up in strength during moments of darkness and silence. May we see our world repaired, and may we have a hand in that repairing. Ken Yehi Ratzon. Shabbat Shalom.